Hello guys, I am Witold and this video may help so many people who have been hearing so many good things about BMW R1250GS and the previous generations and feel almost pressured to target the GS as their next motorcycle while they aren't entirely convinced for some reasons. Let's go through those reasons and see what the options are, because there is one very similar motorcycle with actually the exact same engine as the GS, and that is meant for quite similar purposes. And I'm talking about BMW R1250RT, which has been in the picture for decades in its previous generations. So the GS is a touring enduro motorcycle and can both comfortably carry 2 passengers with luggage and can ride confidently off the beaten tracks. Then there is R1250RT, which can comfortably carry 2 passengers with luggage but cannot ride comfortably off the beaten tracks. So which one to choose if you don't plan actually on riding through the desert or playing in mud? And many people who want to get either of these bikes wonder if, since they don't plan on going off the road, they should by default go with the RT, which may seem like a reasonable choice. Now, this would be a totally wrong approach. Getting a GS doesn't mean that you are going to ride along the tanks during military trainings, guys. Hell no. Think of it as if it was a Range Rover, BMW X5 or a Jeep Grand Cherokee. They can drive off the pavement, but mostly aren't and are not bought with such intent in mind. Somehow this example, I think, works or can work really well. The RT would be here like a Mercedes V-Class, a Chrysler Voyager, or a Volkswagen Charan or a multivan. This is a kind of situations that we have here, including that most people will find an X5 a little bit more exciting and a little bit more cool than a Volkswagen multivan or a transporter. Yet some people will have to get a multivan because their family won't fit into the X5. There is a trick with an RT here, because with those two, the RT is like a multivan with an exact same engine lineup, let's say, as an X5, including a charged V8 from an X5M, 500-600 horsepower. So you kind of get the drill, right? Please let me know in the comments if this comparison, if it makes sense to you guys. So first, what could make you choose the RT over the GS? And let's do it this way and then switch to the opposite view and point out what they both have the same in the end. The first noticeable from the outside difference is that RT has so much more wind protection in the form of fairings, a larger windscreen that is actually electrically adjustable and it's not on a GS, while this regular GS is more kind of a lean machine and doesn't cover the rider as much. So on a longer trip, the RT gives you much more flexibility in terms of wind protection and better wind protection potentially, which is not perfect, however. In the rain, you may end up not being wet on an RT if you ride quickly enough, because even your knees are covered and protected behind the fairings, while on a GS your nose may stay dry. So wind protection is the first thing that kind of supports the idea of an RT. The second thing is that the RT is noticeably lower and will suit shorter riders more potentially. This is very often the reason people choose the RT over a GS. Either they cannot ride the GS even after lowering it and adding a shorter seat, or they don't feel comfortable dealing with a taller motorcycle. That's a valid point that can be a deal breaker in case of a GS. The RT has its seat at either 80.5 centimeters or at 82.5 centimeters, while the regular GS has its seat at 85 or 87 centimeters. It's a big difference, even though it may not seem this way. It really is big of a difference. The third thing is that RT is more touring friendly because of its larger digital screen, where you can have your navigation and some other things at the same time visible, and you have much more space to play with it than on a GS. Then there is the larger electric windscreen, large and already nicely incorporated side panniers, and for example the possibility of having heated seats for both rider and the passenger that the GS didn't have before 2021. Now it also has for two people, but it kind of shows that it wasn't a priority before. There's one thing that it cannot have, which is speakers with a radio, while RT can. So let's go further with a fourth thing, which is brakes that feel stronger in the RT, and for some reason it has been this way since I remember. I do believe that this has something to do with both weight and with how brakes are tuned because of the weight difference. And in my opinion, RT's brakes are slightly more confident than the GS's ones. However, I have a feeling that this may be more of my feeling, general like perception of a bike, and then kind of combining the bike's general behavior with its brakes, and that's where it comes from. They are not necessarily worse on a GS. The GS has fantastic brakes as well. And the next fifth advantage is that the RT has a more comfortable seat. This was meant to be a comfortable touring bike from the beginning, and nobody will be riding it while standing on their foot pegs and holding the bike with their knees. So the seat may be designed purely for sitting on it, maybe wider, and I do believe in my case it is more comfortable. And it's really nice and it's properly soft. I do feel that it's significantly nicer for my bum than the one on a GS. Note that this part is fairly easy to replace or modify in both bikes, so again, not a crazy advantage here. Now the sixth point for the RT is larger fuel capacity, because it's got 25 liters versus only 20 liters in a GS. But yeah, wait. If that would be the case, then there is a GS Adventure with mind-blowing 30 liters of fuel tank capacity. So it's worth knowing, but nothing impossible to overcome if it was the deciding factor. Now the seventh point may on the other hand be a deal breaker for a GS, because it cannot have an adaptive cruise control with a front radar. So in an RT you may now set a desired speed, and if there's a vehicle in front of you that drives more slowly than you are, bike senses it with its radar and it automatically gently slows down. Once that vehicle speeds up, the RT speeds up to the speed that you had set before. So this is a clear and undisputable win for the RT. Another win is the eighth point, and it's that an RT is more stable at high speeds because of different aerodynamics. For example, look at it as if RT would cut through the air, despite they both do that, cutting through the air of course, and then as if the GS would act like more tearing the air into the pieces and throwing it behind itself. The experience is more smooth on RT, and it's also connected and combined with this better wind protection on it. It kind of feels already like a car, this RT, along with the previous models all the way back till 2014. Now a surprise here, because the RT may win a battle of exclusivity, because it's much more rare than a GS, which is very popular on the other hand. And I don't mean just the family of GS, 750, 850, 850 Adventure, and all other variants and the previous ones. I mean the specific model, the 1250GS versus an RT. And the 1250GS is the most popular, one of the most popular bikes. It's the best-selling bike for BMW, and you will see it at every corner. RT would be a better choice if you're looking for something more unique. And as a last 10th point for the RT, I will say that it is likely more comfortable for its passenger. This is, for example, because of the seat being lower from the ground. And I suspect that the seat may also be a bit more comfortable, but I've never actually checked that myself in the newer model. I was riding it myself, I wasn't being a passenger. So check that for yourself. I suspect that since this was a bike that was more designed for riding two up, it may be better for the passenger. So there you have all the reasons that I know of and that I agree with that could make the RT score on your scoreboard higher than the GS. Now let's see where the GS will score better than the RT, and who and why may want to choose the GS over the RT, even despite being shorter. The first thing that I may also surprise you with is the knee angle. This is not the first thing that many of us think about when it comes to choosing motorcycles, but I realized how important this is after recently riding the RT, the 1250. It's a bike with a seat that's rather low to the ground, and that means that the knee angle is larger when riding a GS, and this impacted negatively my whole experience, my whole riding experience. So your legs are bent more. They are more like this rather than like this. More bent, less bent. Bent on an RT, that's bent on a GS. And generally this is more comfortable than this. Yeah, try to sit like this. Or even like this. I'm 183 centimeters tall, and it would make my legs feel less comfortable on an RT. And I would feel less control over the bike, as I wouldn't be able to generate as much pressure on the foot pegs as when riding a GS. Secondly, somehow, even despite the difference here not being that large, you can feel that RT and GS weigh differently. RT is 279 kilograms with fuel, and GS is 30 kilograms less at 249 kilograms. You definitely can feel it. And knee angle and more narrow handlebar of an RT contribute to even more of a less confident feel on it comparing to the GS. Thirdly, thanks to a different setup and a different position on the GS, it's easier to handle right from the start. I believe that higher position on this bike with your legs and arms connected to the bike at points that are kind of further away from each other, it gives you a better control over it. Wider handlebar is an important point here. It makes you feel like you really own the bike, and steering becomes easier thanks to it too. On the other hand, if you have rather short arms, it may be quite hard in some situations for you to follow the side of the handlebar that's further away from you. I even would find it difficult. I would have to bend forward and reach out very far. Now, the fourth point goes to the GS, as I'm very much convinced that it rides in a more comfortable way suspension-wise. I know this is a tough topic because there is a lot about personal feel here as well, but I do feel more comfortable suspension-wise on a GS. This is mainly because of two things. First will never be achieved by the RT, and that's wheels travel. So large potholes, whatever road irregularities are just soaked up by the larger wheels travel of a GS. So percentage-wise, the movement of each wheel takes less out of its total capability in a GS rather than in an RT. RT actually loses its composure more quickly than some of you guys might expect on just slightly more rough surfaces. It's the same with the regular GS and an Adventure. The Adventure will feel more smooth riding over rough terrain because its wheels will be using less of the total compression possible. It will fly over the bumps. Same story with 800 GS and 800 GS Adventure, and 850 GS and 850 GS Adventure. The second thing within this point is that there is this weird wobbly and loose behavior, the feeling of loose behavior of the RT when being at some angle, when it's leaning left or right, or from your perspective, right and left. It kind of gets unstable and feels like it's moving its tail, where there's absolutely nothing like that in a GS. And this one rides in a perfectly neutral way. To me, this is a big win for the GS, and it's very quickly visible. In the fifth point, I'll tell you the first obvious, and sitting higher means seeing further, and this makes me myself feel better, more confident and safer on a motorcycle. I know it does for many of you guys. We can plan more early and really see better, especially in the city where it matters even more perhaps. It's just a few centimeters, but it really enhances the feeling for me. One of the reasons why people choose SUVs so often now. And sixth, and the next obvious one, is off-road capabilities, which RT has none of, and GS, even with the street tires, will let you play in a more rough terrain. Even in the cities, you may sometimes want to ride over a curb, and it will be easier and safer for you and the bike if you do it on a GS rather than the RT. And the last one, the seventh, if you expect to fall often, GS will get less damaged because of fewer expensive fairings. And also because of the crash bars that you can easily mount to it. Now, what important elements they both have? It's, for example, a maintenance-free drive shaft. They both have a quick shifter. They both have very similar suspensions in terms of technology used. It's telelever in the front and paralever in the back. And the telelever in the front is very successfully preventing both of these bikes from diving, especially when braking with the front brake. Their power and torque are the same, so you may expect that they will give you a very similar performance, with the GS being a bit more quick and agile thanks to being lighter. Then both provide a very comfortable upright position, and both move in a very agile and neutral way when riding, when maneuvering too. Price-wise, they are quite similar, with the RT being around 10% more expensive than a GS in a base version. None of them lacks anything in terms of possible equipment. This can also be a tough and independent image of a legendary GS versus looking like a cop on a more rare RT. So guys, please let me know in the comments which one is a better match for you and why. This is great feedback for all of us. The choice is yours, guys, and I hope that this was helpful. And if it was, give this video a like and subscribe to see the upcoming one.